Hello everyone and welcome back to our revision videos. This week we are looking at Jane Weir's poem Poppies, which is part of the Power and Conflict anthology. Right, let's start with a bit of context behind the poet, Jane Weir. So Jane Weir was born in 1963 and she has lived in Northern Ireland during the Troubles in the 80s. She has done many interviews explaining her inspiration for the poem Poppies, and one particular interview she stated that she used to walk with her son when he was much younger along the winding path towards the War Memorial, which was located at St Giles's Church, which is where she is from, around where she's from. Weir's poetry displays an array of social, historical, political, and emotional preoccupations. Okay, she likes to explore these themes. The themes cover a diverse range of scenarios, situations, and voices, and quite principally, these voices are from women. Now, she was commissioned by Caroline Duffy, who you know from our other poem, War Photographer, to write a poem for a collection of poems that were aimed to discuss the wars of the Gulf Wars and the Iraq War. Now, Jane Weir decided that she wanted to write this poem, Poppies, but she left the specific war to ambiguity. So it's not based on a particular war in our history. It's almost like a culmination of all the wars that have been experienced by soldiers and then everybody else. And then just a little bit of context behind the image of the poppy. So we all know that the poppy is a well-known and well-established symbol, and it carries such a wealth of history and meaning with it. Okay, they are worn every year, and they are, presenters wear them on TV, people wear them in the streets, you see them sold in your local shops. Wearing a poppy is a very personal choice. It is not compulsory, and it often reflects an individual's experience and personal memories to do with war. So they could have family members that are associated with war, or historical links to war, or just generally supporting those soldiers who are currently serving in our army. During World War One, the fighting took place in Western Europe majoritively, and the countryside was bombed and fought over repeatedly. And these beautiful landscapes that once stood were destroyed and turned to mud and were barren. Okay, so they're completely empty, where little or nothing could actually grow. But what people noticed is that there was an exception to this bleakness, and that was through sort of the resilience of the poppy. The poppies flourished in the middle of this chaos and destruction, and they grew in thousands upon thousands. Poppies spread lots of seeds um, when they are in seed, okay? So they grow in multitudes. Now, considering the title is Poppies, you've got to think about not only about that historical context, but what does a poppy symbolise? And this poppy could symbolise someone mourning and experiencing the barren and hopeless feeling of grief, but this is defied by the resilience of love. So that feeling of grief is overcome by this feeling of love. And sort of, I always think about a popular quote where it talks about, aren't you lucky to feel grief because it means that you have loved? As always, we'll start with the form and structural analysis of our poem. There are three main things you could talk about in your structural response. So the first one is the form of the poem, and it takes place as a dramatic monologue. Dramatic monologue means that there's one character talking and we don't really hear from anybody else, and it's their innermost thoughts. Weir uses a persona of a mother grieving the loss of her son to war. Now, you must be aware that it is open to interpretation if the son is dead or alive. I like to think of it as it's just the initial grief of the mother as she sends her son off to war, but there are many people who believe that the son has died and she's grieving that actual death. The use of the dramatic monologue adds to this intimate nature of the poem because we are being exposed to the mother's most inner private thoughts. We can also look at the fact that the poem is free verse, so that means that there's no definitive rhyme scheme, which mimics the sounds of like these uncensored private thoughts and also like a release of memories from the mother. The use of free verse also highlights the feeling of loss and pain for the mother who has suffered loss at the hands of war and conflict. I would also say that it adds an intimate nature because we also know that the mother is addressing the son directly, and maybe this is another a desperate attempt to withhold that connection that she has with her son. The last thing that we'd like to comment on is the use of enjambment, so where the lines run on to the next line without the interruption of punctuation. And the use of enjambment in this poem magnifies the sense of the mother's recollection of memories and this stream of consciousness that is being released from her grief. We are now going to look at 3 lines of argument that you could use if the poem Poppies comes up. Now, these lines of argument lend themselves really nicely to other poems that you could compare in the anthology, and you've got to have a little think about which poems fit these lines of argument the most. I absolutely love this poem because I feel like the language and the analysis is really rich. It is open to so much interpretation, so I think it's a really, really useful poem to revise. So the first sort of section of the poem that we're going to look at is the quotation, crimped petals, spasms of paper red, disrupting a blockade of yellow bias binding around your blazer. Now we've got those 2 words there, spasms and red, which symbolise the violent nature of war, okay? Because you could look at the imagery of red, which represents blood and therefore death. The spasms suggest this rather violent sort of attack on the body and the response of the body. And this not only disrupts, but it acts as a stark reminder of the true consequences of war, okay? For a mother, these consequences are felt before sending their child to war, and then therefore this imagery can foreshadow for some, unfortunately, the inevitable destruction that will therefore follow for the child that they've sent off. I would also look at the fact that there's a reference to this blazer, so you will notice throughout the poem there are repeated references to sort of childlike childhood images, and this blazer could also symbolise like a school uniform, and it's this idea that the mother is so desperate to withhold her son's innocence, and that's running through sort of this stream of consciousness as she recalls losing her son. The second quotation we're going to look at is, all my words, flattened, rolled, turned into felt, slowly melting. Now, the first thing that you need to know is that Jane Weir is not only just a poet, but she was a textile artist. So she dealt with fabrics quite a lot, and you can also see that reference through the poem with the references to stitching and the material in the poem. Now, I like to look at this in 2 different ways. You could look at the imagery of the mother's impossible ability of this like conversation. So it's this struggle of how do you send a loved one off to war, to the inevitable chaos and destruction. And it's this idea that the felt could symbolise the mother's tongue becoming almost like cottony, like really thick and unable to form words because she's struggling so much with the grief of losing her son. So it's really difficult to put into words this loss. And alternatively, it could represent the assault that is caused by war. If we look at that language, it almost symbolises the movement of tanks, the flattened and rolled. So we could also look at this idea that her only language she now associates with her son is linked to this trauma of war and she can't escape it. Still using that first line of argument of we're using the poem to explore the power of loss caused by war and conflict, we have got 2 additional quotations that you could use to explore. So this one is possibly my favourite quotation from the whole poem. After you'd gone, I went into your bedroom, released a songbird from its cage. I think this is such a vivid image of a mother just truly experiencing the grief that she feels sending her son off to war. I also like the reference to the fact that she has to go into his bedroom. It's not her bedroom, because it's this idea that she wants to be physically close to her son and she wants to surround herself in his space and his things. Then you've got that heartbreaking metaphor of released a songbird from its cage, which encapsulates the utter grief felt by the mother. I can really sort of imagine it's this pent up stress and trauma that she is now releasing in private, because she's held it up, she's held it in for so long because she tried to maintain her strength for her son, and she needed to hide her feelings because obviously she didn't want to send him off to war with his understanding of how much it's breaking her inside. And I almost imagine the songbird is the reference to her screams and her cries as she sort of processes this grief. Then the next one we're going to look at is I listened, hoping to hear your playground voice catching on the wind. Now, the first thing I'd look at is the verb hoping, because it really reinforces the sense of loss for the mother, because she does not want to face the reality of her son leaving for war or losing her son to war. Again, like I mentioned before, you've got that consistent childhood references, which enhances the mother's longing for her son to return to his innocence, because if you have a child and you are a parent or a mother, you know that when they are little and innocent, it is your job to protect and comfort them, and she has lost that sort of motivation as a mother because her son is now grown up and is pursuing his dreams, as we see in the poem, to become a soldier. I would also look at the imagery of the mother sort of hopelessly listening to the wind in order to sort of maintain that connection, because she wants to hear his voice on the wind. And it's definitely a melancholic image and heightens how this mother feels lost and alone without her son. And what we've got here is Weir truly emphasises the tragedy of war and conflict and its far-reaching consequences. So unlike the other poems in the anthology, where you've got Remains and Bayonet Charge, where they specifically target a soldier experiencing that war and chaos themselves, this is like the secondary impact of war and the feelings that family members have to go through. We are changing up the line of argument now, so just check the top of the screen. So Weir uses the poem to explore the power of connection and how through war this is destroyed. Okay, so we're changing our line of argument to explore this sense of connection that the mother needs and desires to have with her son. The first quotation we're going to look at is, and you can break this up into little chunks, I wanted to graze my nose across the tip of your nose, play at being Eskimos like we did when you were little. Now, this is imagery of a game played between a parental figure and a child, and you rub noses, and it is a form of endearment. It's the way Eskimos show their love for one another in the cold, okay? Something my mum used to do to me when I was little. And through this imagery and through this very sort of memorable imagery, like I look at this and I think I remember doing that, so that's purposely done by Weir to sort of build that connection and perhaps pull that sort of grief out of other people so that they can recognise her feelings. Weir reveals that the memories that the mother clings to is to reinstate that innocence, like we said before. She wants to keep him as a child in her mind because it really truly removes the reality of the trauma of where her son is headed or has been destroyed by. I would also look at the semantic field of touch, which is used in that quotation with the word graze, but throughout the poem there are verbs such as smoothed, run and traced, and all of these are actions in which the mother wants to physically touch something, whether it's her son or whether it's the war memorial. Now, these verbs symbolise the physical touch, which emphasises the mother's desperate desire to maintain that physical connection to her son. Okay, she doesn't want to lose that. If her son is dead, she will never ever be able to experience that ever again. So it's this like power of memory that enhances her connection to her son. It also enables the mother to memorise her son, which is why she doesn't want to sort of let go of him. And through the son's leaving to war, this physical connection is lost to the mother and therefore enhances her grief that she feels. I would then look at the quotation, leaned against it like a wishbone. Okay, so this is in the final stanza where she's tracing the inscriptions of the war memorial and she's leaning against it. Again, we've got some more beautiful imagery of the mother touching this war memorial in order to maintain that connection with her son. You could look at the simile, like a wishbone, which reinforces the delicate nature of the mother's resolve and her ability to stand without her son's presence. So she's almost using that war memorial as a support physically for her because she is struggling so much with that grief. A wishbone as well is something that is used between two people, comes out of a chicken usually, and two people break this wishbone, and then the person who wins, who has the longest piece, is able to make a wish. And perhaps this therefore symbolises the mother's fragility and her sort of persistent desire to wish for her son's return because she's mourning that loss of him and she can't cope. And finally, the last line of argument, Weir uses the poem to explore the power of propaganda and how it affects the motivations of young men and their families. So if you were to look at this line of argument, poems that would be coming to my mind would be Bayonet Charge and Kamikaze in comparison, looking at the desire that young men have to pursue taking part in the army. The first image that I'm going to look at is I resisted the impulse to run my fingers through the gelled blackthorns of your hair. Now, the reference to the blackthorns is a reference to religious imagery because in the Christian belief, Jesus sacrifices himself and it is seen as this divine plan to save humanity. On the cross, Jesus wore a crown of thorns. So here, we could be exploring the sort of devastating crucifixion of young men who are motivated by the need to save humanity. And it's that true loss. Like the mother feels that her son is crucifying himself in the name of war. Okay, so her son is a sacrifice. And this is something that she has got to adjust to as well. Again, you're thinking about that semantic field of touch. She wants to run her hands through his gel blackthorns of his hair. So again, she needs to have that physical connection to her son. Then we'd look at the next quotation where it says, threw it open, the world overflowing like a treasure chest. So we've got the verb through coupled with that simile like a treasure chest, which truly encapsulates the power of propaganda. Okay, Weir explores the alluring pull of patriotism that is felt by lots of soldiers. And as the son leaves, it feels like almost like an adventure because of the glory that sort of coincides with being a soldier. And this treasure almost connotes his naive perception of this newfound freedom as an adult, and also this childlike excitement caused by the power of propaganda. So again, we've got that childlike imagery that is maintained throughout the poem, but here it is a criticism because it's almost as if the mother knows that her son doesn't quite know what he's signing up for. And then the last one is a split second and you were away, intoxicated. So we've got multiple things that we could analyse here. The first is the phrase a split second, which reveals like the impulsivity of the son, like it's an impulsive decision. He's away just like that. And it's another reference to maybe this childlike or naive nature because he's been blinded by patriotism and there's no delay in his thinking. There's no sort of considering the actions and the consequences of these actions. Alternatively, we could also look at the split second, could be a euphemism for the time it takes to die in war, which Weir is clearly revealing is wasteful. You know, the opportunities this young man has, thinking about the way he's grown up in a loving environment, and it's this loss, this instantaneous loss that the mother feels. Then you'd have to look at the adjective intoxicated. Okay, again, we've got another criticism of the power of propaganda, because it implies that this propaganda and the sense of patriotism causes a sense of irrationality, just like alcohol. Like you're under the influence of something, and it's not something that a decision that you make sort of compass mentis, like you are not completely in control of your motivations, because it's almost like you're under this influence of the glory, the lull that goes alongside taking part in war, okay, and crucifying yourself in the name of humanity. So, a really, really quick whistle-stop tour. I love this poem. There are so many other opportunities to analyse the language and the imagery that I have not covered, but I really strongly recommend go through that poem again, make sure the annotations are all in detail, because it's a beautiful poem to analyse. Thanks, guys. See you next week.